Get started. We will call to order the meeting of the Pinellas County Charter Review Commission for April 22nd, 2024. We'll start with introductions. My name is Brian Ongst, and I have the honor of serving as the chair. I was appointed by Commissioner Lavala, and to my right.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lindsay Grove. I'm the vice chair, and I was appointed public at large.
Good evening, Wade Vos, General Counsel to the Charter Review Commission, and I have here tonight with me
Chloe Berryman, Assistant Legal Counsel.
State Senator Nick DeSegli, Pinellas Delegation Appointee.
Dave Eggers, County Commissioner appointed by the County Commission.
Alan Swartz, appointed by Commissioner Peters.
Jim Milliken, Public at Large Citizen, appointed by Commissioner Peters.
Doug Thomas, Facilitator to the CRC.
Ashley Overend, appointed by Commissioner Brian Scott.
Mike Twitty, Property Appraiser, Constitutional Officers Appointee.
All right, thank you all. And we have Commissioner Strickland is online. Mark, I don't know if you want to test out the unmute and see if we can hear you, or if you're not in a position to do that, go ahead, sir.
Hey, good evening. I'm online. I can hear you guys loud and clear.
Perfect, and I am very loud. My voice does not generally have to be amplified. So, and Mark, we can hear you, so that's good. And Mark, if you when you want to chime in, just if you raise your hand or just unmute, I'll be watching to make sure I don't miss you. Okay?
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay, let's go ahead with public comment. We have Mr. Ballard Geddes Jr. here. Mr. Ballard Geddes, when you get situated, you will have 3 minutes. No rush. Take your time.
Hi, good evening. My name is David Ballard Geddes Jr. I live at 802 Georgia Avenue in Palm Harbor. Based on Pinellas County Resolution 95-286, Section 4C-2 stating absolute bill of sale and release of lien, the county has been sold to the Water District in a 30-year fee simple title transfer of county function and power as recognized in Pinellas County Home Rule Charter, Section 2.04Q. The county, in a quid pro quo agreement with the Water District, is intending to shapeshift the county from its fortnighted statesmanship into a politically laundered watershed jurisdiction as classified under the 14th Amendment. This 30-year transfer of title is simply referred to as an amortization process, or is commonly being called climate change. We are approximately 15 years into the transfer process of that sale of the county to the Water District. In order for the county sale and transfer to be completed, it's going to require an additional 3 4-year terms followed by a cooling off period as discussed and agreed upon at last month's charter meeting. Currently, as juxtapositioned, the non-ad valorem Water District levy, underpinned in and on the county ad valorem property tax lien, is slowly going to assume the functions and the power of the county, dissolving the county lien and assuming itself as a Water District operation. District schools, district fire department, district police are then further to be assumed as jurisdictional powers under the 14th Amendment in such classified position, thereby taking political power away from an elected form of county government and transferring it into the hands of unelected despots and tyrants in such process and transfer. Based on Florida Statute 197.3632, the non-ad valorem water levy underpinned in and on the county ad valorem property tax lien is not based on the millage rate and is a violation of the Uniform Rule Clause of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 and 4 of the U.S. Constitution. Our current structure of government is being used as a puppet government serving the unforthrightful nature of 14th Amendment water jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Do we have anyone else for public comment? Seeing none, we will move on to review and approval of the April 4th, 2024 meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
Move approval.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Now we'll move on to item 5, new business. Compilation and comparison of elected executive provisions for selected counties and municipalities. And I assume I'll be turning this over to Mr. Attorney Vose and Mr. Thomas and Attorney Perryman.
Chairman, thank you very much. Commissioners, good evening. You have before you a very thick packet tonight. Wanted to make sure you had these materials in front of you. If you engaged in any discussion concerning these matters. The first item before you is a memorandum put together by our office providing you a compilation and comparison of different provisions related to elected executives in selected charter counties and municipalities throughout the state. As we've previously discussed, among the 20 charter counties in Florida, 3 of them have an elected executive or elected county mayor. Those 3 counties being Miami-Dade County, Orange County, and Duval County, also being the city of Jacksonville. In the memorandum, you've got a table providing a comparison of relevant set of charter provisions relating to the elected county executive or elected county mayor. They're dealing with some of the most essential powers of those offices. Attached to the memo as well are a set of exhibits that provide both the kind of the core provision of the charter relating to the powers of the mayor, and then another set of exhibits providing a broader sketch of different charter provisions that are affected in each of those charters by the fact that they have an elected executive form of government. Very similarly, in the packet, we've collected together information concerning the 4 largest municipalities in Florida with an elected executive or strong mayor form of government, those being the city of Miami, the city of Tampa, the city of Orlando, and the city of St. Petersburg. You'll note a footnote, by the way, concerning the city of Miami. While a lot of documentation around the state refers to the city of Miami as a strong mayor form of government, it's probably by far the weakest among the large strong mayor cities in that the elected mayor in the city of Miami has ultimately very little power, does have the power to appoint the city, I think the title is city manager, who then exercises the executive or administrative authority. That mayor in Miami also has veto power, but those are really kind of the only powers that that office has. Of course, you have other ones that are closer to the experience here in Pinellas County, at least with respect to nearby jurisdictions, the city of Tampa and the city of St. Petersburg. I'll note just for a little bit of historical context, you'll see back both with the county and the city charters, we've got 2 oddballs, if you will, and both of them are over in Orange County, where my office is based. In Orange and in the city of Orlando, and there's a historical reason why they're very similar. In both those instances, the elected county mayor, the elected executive, also serves as a voting chair of the governing body, of the county commission or the city council in turn. That is not the most typical form you find around the state by any means, but I just wanted to point out that that's kind of a unique geographical situation that's arisen over in Orange County. Like I said, it is a voluminous stack of exhibits here. If you've had a chance to take a peek at it, thought this would help inform your discussions. If there is an interest in pursuing an elected county executive position, to see what some of the other relevant provisions are in other counties and cities to kind of piece together what you might be looking at. And Chairman, I'm glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Attorney Vose. One question I had is I'd like to see term limits. I'm assuming that the executive mayors are subject to the same term limits, if any, that the council members or commissioners are. I believe that's the case for all of them. but that would be an important question since we're talking about that as well.
Absolutely.
And then partisan elections or not, obviously county commissioners are part of the Florida Constitution, whereas county executive electeds are not. And so I'm interested to understand whether, if we were to decide to propose something, would we need to indicate whether it would be partisan or nonpartisan? Understanding that constitutionally that's very different from the county commission, or maybe it's not, but I'd like to know more about that.
Sure. And with regard to the first question, absolutely. Coming into your next meeting, we can very easily have that information put together about the term limits in effect with regard to all of these offices. I can tell you two off the top of my head. In Orange County, the county mayor is subject to the same term limits as the other members of the county commission, which is 8 years. In the city of Orlando, famously, there are not term limits on the mayor of Orlando. Buddy Dyer has been mayor for at least since I was in high school. So pretty sure since, yeah. But we will have that information for you at the next meeting. As to the question of partisan versus nonpartisan, and this is a matter of perhaps a little bit of controversy, but I can give you what I would tell you the latest Florida Supreme Court guidance is on this question. The latest guidance from the Florida Supreme Court is that elections for county offices, all right, not necessarily just designated as some particular office or other, that county offices must be done, elections must be done on a partisan basis. Now, I say that it is a matter of some controversy because at least 5 counties, 5 of the 20 charter counties have nonpartisan elections, and they continue to have nonpartisan elections. Just sharing, I can't hide the ball from you all on this point when you all are going to be endeavoring in doing something new. The latest guidance from the Florida Supreme Court, and again, Florida Supreme Court can always get a little bit more nuanced with some subsequent decision of theirs, but based on the latest guidance, any elected office that you would have, that you would create, even the charter, I would advise you that it would be a partisan office.
Excellent information as always. Thank you, sir. Okay, other questions, comments? Yes, Fraser Twitty.
Mr. Vose, was that recent decision, was that the one in Orange County when they challenged on term limits and partisanship, and they prevailed on partisanship but not on term limits?
Yeah, with regard to the constitutional officers, in Orange County 6 constitutional officers in that instance, yes. But the language of that case, and I'll give you all very little bit of the history on that case. It's a very interesting one where the Florida Supreme Court issued an opinion in the very beginning of January of that year. I guess it was 20 I don't remember what year. It'll come to me in a second. But it was, oh wait, no, it was right before Governor DeSantis took office. So that would be 2019. So it's first day or two of January 2019. Florida Supreme Court issued an opinion. A couple days later, after we had a couple changes on the Florida Supreme Court, that opinion was rescinded. And then in April of 2019, a new opinion came out that completely changed the reasoning and the result. Under the prior opinion, it was perfectly fine to the Florida Supreme Court at that time that you have nonpartisan constitutional officers. With the new opinion that came out in April, they found that you could not. And the clear language and reasoning of that case went directly to county officers, any officer being elected in a county position.
Okay. Other comments or questions regarding the comparison data that was provided by Attorney Vose? All right, Mr. Thomas, just so y'all know what our game plan is here, we're hoping that at the next meeting we'll have a presentation on the form of government question, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Thomas to maybe give us a little bit of an update on that. I know we're still working on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, when Wade and the chair and I had discussed, recognizing that tonight was going to be kind of the rollout of the topic of the concept of an elected executive position, we thought we'd set the table at tonight's meeting, and then the goal was to have either at the next meeting or the next two meetings, we're trying to get all in the next meeting, the ability to have speakers to present information about a traditional council manager form of government, and also the possibility of someone who might be able to come in to speak under a strong mayor or an elected executive form of government. We've gotten a speaker lined up for the council manager form of government, and I'm not going to put her on the spot, but I'll introduce her. She's here this evening. Pam Brancaccio, who is a former FCCMA president, but has also served in a variety of structures of government here in Florida. So she can really speak to all different types of forms that may be under consideration, and is also a resident now of Treasure Island, so a resident here of Pinellas County. So I think we've got a pretty good speaker on that side set up, and I've invited Pam to come to hear any of the conversation this evening as well. The chair and I have discussed a couple other potential speakers on the strong mayor or chief executive position, and we're trying to run that down and see if we could also have that also all available at our next meeting.
All right, very good. So the plan would be for the May 2nd meeting to have a more in-depth presentation from two viewpoints on that, if that's okay with everybody. I think that's what we discussed at the last meeting. All right, any other comments, questions on this topic before? Yes, Attorney Bose.
Chairman, one last thing I would mention, as we've alluded to before and as we'll be discussing further as we look at the compilation of other matters you've looked at, the CRC's time is getting short. We have a discrete number of meetings left before we get to the end. So I just wanted to offer, coming into the next meeting, if there is an interest in amongst or after the discussion that you have with individuals and amongst each other at the next meeting, it would be very helpful to have any direction from the CRC as to preparing language. So you have something to look at if that is the direction the CRC would entertain.
So my thought on that is that after the presentation, we'll take a straw vote on who's interested in moving forward with language and who's not. And that way, if the interest isn't there, i.e. if a majority don't want to move forward with getting draft language, then we'll stop. And then we'll basically be in a position to wrap the entire process up. If their majority does have interest in seeing draft language, then we'll move forward and we'll probably have an additional 1 or 2 additional meetings that we've already calendared, okay? So we planned into building out this calendar that we might pursue language. And if we do, we have plenty of time within this calendar to do that. If we don't pursue language, then this calendar is excessive in terms of dates and we'll be able to wrap up well ahead of that. Okay?
Just a quick question.
Yes, Commissioner Eggers.
Yeah, so I'm assuming when you say majority to move it forward, we're just talking about a majority of those present, just to keep it alive.
That's what we're going to have to
moving.
do. Yeah, that's what we're going to have to do.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to require 7 to go. That's what we decided early on. But at least to keep it moving, we just have a majority of those present.
It's just like when I think Commissioner Strickland asked, do people even want to talk about term limits? And we did a quick vote. Who wants to talk about term limits? Who doesn't? That's what I have in mind.
I just want to make sure it was clear. Thanks.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, I have to miss the next meeting. I'm going to be in an airplane at the time. Can I submit my comments and thoughts to
Doug? Sure.
Doug? Sure. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Other comments, questions, concerns? Okay. Moving on now, we have some language on the initiative process, the timing thereof in terms of collection and submittal of petitions for citizen-initiated petitions. This was the topic that we discussed with Supervisor Marcus about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago now. And I will turn it over to Mr. Vose and Mr. Thomas.
Chairman, thank you. Back at your February 26th meeting, the CRC discussed with the supervisor the general direction of some potential revisions to the county's initiative petition process for charter amendments. What you have before you is the result of my taking the notes from that meeting of the direction I was hearing the CRC wanting to go, and after putting together a first draft, running it by staff in the Supervisor of Elections office. As the Supervisor's office has been very clear with the CRC and with CRC staff, they don't want to take hard positions endorsing any particular charter amendment of any sort, even ones that directly impact them. But as we discussed previously, I was simply seeking their feedback as to things for me to consider in my recommendations back to the CRC, things that I may have put in a prior draft that could interrupt some process of theirs inadvertently and what have you. So I did put together a draft. I circulated it to the supervisor's office, and then we talked through their comments and suggested revisions, and it was incredibly helpful. And as a result of that process, this is what you have before you now. The basics of what this charter amendment does are as follows. First off, as you all discussed previously, it sets up a uniform time period leading up to a November general election so that folks will know when the petition gathering period is, not looking at rolling timelines or anything like this with regard to windows. Originally, I had it set at starting on October 1st and going through May, was it 31st? Going through the last day of May. But when I gamed out all that time, I realized that the time given to the supervisor all the way to the end to get everything all done would have put her final deadline at July 15th, which is getting really close up to when she wants to start getting things lined up for the ballot and so on. So I bumped it back a month. And so that's what you have here now before you with those dates. We have a process whereby each month the petition sponsor with the signed petitions, no later than 10 days after the end of each month, they have to turn them in. They're not required to wait to the 10th day, but that's kind of a deadline for them to get them in. There is in this, as opposed to all the deadlines for the petition gatherer, which are all kind of hard deadlines on a given day of the month or what have you, we have a rolling 30-day deadline for the supervisor of elections to verify signatures, okay? We went back and forth discussing, various possibilities. The supervisor's office was clear with me that they're very used to rolling deadlines. That's what the state requires with regard to other types of petitions, so that didn't bother them at all. And that's what you currently have under, as I said, under state law. We have a requirement that there be a posting of running tallies of the verified signatures on the supervisor's website so folks can know where those are at any given time. We have some detail provided concerning the petition sponsor having to prepare also the ballot translations that are required for the ballot, just a little thing so that it's one less thing the supervisor's office or anybody else has to worry about. The folks who are pushing it, they can get that translated. We have the requirement that clarifies a matter that I learned from the supervisor's office has been a matter of significant discussion apparently in the past about whether or not folks register as a political committee to push charter amendments. I'll just share that's never been much of a question of much controversy in a number of other counties where I've worked, but apparently it's been a matter of discussion in the past here in Pinellas County for folks pushing those. So we have it in here to clarify the matter and make it crystal clear. You have to register as a political committee. And then finally, we have a time period starting on August 1st, a month before that beginning September 1st period, when a petition sponsor can come in to get their petition form reviewed for form and get it okayed prior to the petition process starting, and then a final deadline of June 15th for the supervisor to certify whether the requisite number of signatures have been verified. So a lot of little changes and tweaks, the primary core of which, though, is to put it on a uniform time period for collecting petitions. And all of that has been implemented in the language that's before you with the ballot summary. I actually went ahead just as an experiment for you all to take a look at and also included an Exhibit B because the CRC had previously discussed and we've formulated language concerning lowering the number of petitions necessary to propose an amendment from 8% to 5%. I took a hack at including that language as well in a version of the ballot summary. So those two pieces could be together, and that's what you have as Exhibit B, if that was of interest to the CRC to put those two issues together because they're very highly related.
So let me just lead with that question. So if we were to decide to propose reducing the percent required of registered voters petitions to be turned in from 8%, which is current, to 5%, and we decided to move forward with implementing this timeframe regime, we could do that in one question, is what you're saying?
I believe so, yes, absolutely.
As opposed to two separate questions.
Right.
All right, so that was my question. Questions? Yes, Senator DeSigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And forgive me, I was not here when our supervisor of election was here. But can you, and we also have two new members here as well. I think it might be helpful. Can you explain this kind of the timeline, the proposed timeline, which I guess would be Exhibit A? How does that compare to what's currently in the charter?
Sure. So, and thank you very much, Senator. One thing I omitted was included, and I thought this would be helpful from a practical standpoint, in the memorandum as well is a table that kind of plays out the timeline of what you have going month to month so folks can see, when things would be due and so on. It's actually an example of perhaps what the administrative benefit for a petition sponsor might be. Currently, there's a time period of 240 days in which to collect signatures, all right? The time period that's set out here, if I recall correctly, from from September 1st through April 30th is like 242 days or 243 days. It's effectively the same time period. The issue becomes, under the charter language, the time starts ticking, that 240 days starts ticking when your form of petition is approved, all right? Which is all well and good, except you end up with floating end dates, okay? And you end up with situations, and it's not insurmountable. I mean, what it basically means is folks who are organizing a petition drive need to sit down and put together a chart, not dissimilar to what you have here, to plan out, all right, this is how much we got to do, this is what we got to do by this, and this is the deadline, this, and so on. The issue becomes, you end up, if you had 2 or 3 of them going, you end up with 2 or 3 different end deadlines, and folks don't know what's going on. So the idea was, hey, if we are going to make this simpler for folks trying to do this, not making it radically easier, but simpler so there's not traps for the unwary and so on. And we say, all right, it's going to be at the general election, just at the general election, then we can go ahead and we're going to put this in a discrete window of time, and that's effectively what you have here. The time period, the number of days is effectively the same.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One last question. Where did we come up with the 5%? Is there a historical reason for that, or again, I wasn't here for that meeting. So where did that lowering that threshold to 5% come from?
Sure, and I would defer to the other members of the CRC. This was from prior discussion back in. It may have been during session, actually, Senator. Back in January or February, I believe, where there had been discussion among the CRC about lowering that number from 8 to 5, and there was discussion among the CRC members, and that was, again, no final action's been taken, but that was the consensus to prepare language to that effect.
Does anyone else recall, my recollection was that the 5% would be somewhere right around like 35,000. Does that sound right, Vice Chair?
Yes, I think that was the reasoning, as well as I know that we had looked at other counties and what their percentages were, and some other counties did also have 5%, if I recall. I think that really the overall or overarching reason was to make it a little bit easier and less cumbersome, especially given how much our county is growing, but ensuring that we still have to have, that a precedent had been set in other counties for at least a 5% threshold.
I think the overall purpose was to try to make it easier for citizens to get initiatives on the ballot. That was the stated desire. Other questions, Commissioner Eggers?
Yeah, I must have missed a meeting too, because I was trying to remember the conversation that we had about this topic when the supervisor was here. Of course, he didn't provide a lot of guidance or opinions about that. But I thought we talked about syncing it with the state for February 1st, and that would start the process essentially June 1st. So it was sliding it back to be in line with the same time frame as the state. So I don't know, again, where the August to April, so I'm just throwing that out. But I don't remember us moving away from that. I don't think we took a vote on it necessarily, but it was just because I'm already, when I saw that June 15th date, I'm already a little nervous. Like that seems awfully close. Even though I know it can be done, it's just, it's a little uncomfortable. But anyway, I thought it was going to be more like, I think we even joked around and said it would be June 6th, to make that 240 days. But if you did it June 1 to, February 1. So
Sure.
anyway.
And any of this, of course, is very easy to shift around just by changing, those different months. The one thing I would offer, the notes I came away from the meeting with, and again, are just my notes, just what I gathered from the meeting, was a gravitation somewhere towards the other end of it, having it end kind of in May and so on, because I recall at least a little discussion of the concern that while there is the May deadline for the state, that may end up being
February.
I'm sorry, I apologize, you're exactly right. The February deadline for state constitutional amendments. I recall a little bit of discussion that may end up in a confluence of the supervisor's office counting a whole lot of petitions, not just from state level, but also from county level. But again, whichever direction the CRC wants to go is very easy to move around dates.
Yeah, and I think I somewhat recall there was the discussion about in the state you have to get the question has to be reviewed by the Florida Supreme Court, and so maybe that was one of the reasons. I don't know. I mean, that was my recollection of that conversation. I feel like we had two separate conversations. The conversation about the 5% versus 8% was before the meeting with Supervisor Marcus. I think that was in 2023.
It may
We
have been.
We had that
even last
conversation
year,
in
yes.
like December of 2023. And then Supervisor Marcus came in January or February and talked about and she was the one that introduced the time frame question. I mean, my thought is, one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to shorten the time frame for folks to get to gather petitions, because whether it's 5% or 8%, that's still a lot, and that still takes a lot of time and effort. And so it is 240 days in the charter now. I did the online date calculator. If you started September 1st and you ended April 30th, that's 241 days. So, but I think the issue that we have is it's unclear right now because you have 240 days, but the supervisor might say, I don't have time to do this, you've turned it in way too late, which is entirely her right to do that because, you can't expect her to put something on the ballot the week before the election, right? So that the intent of trying to put a time frame in there is to make it clear for everybody, if you want to do a petition, this is when you've got to do it, and this is what's reasonable in terms of counting and verifying and also getting the ballot printed and doing all of that, which takes time and is very similar to candidates qualifying for office. But I'm still a little mixed on it. One of the thoughts I have is I'm familiar with the state process, Attorney Vose, and I'm pretty sure you get 2 bites at the apple. So you can be active for 2 election cycles. If you collect petitions and you miss the 24, you can still use those same petitions and go to 26. I'm look into that, but my understanding from my looking at it was that you can keep the same petitions alive for 4 years, or at least 2 years. And so if we could do something like that, then that would make a little more sense to me, so that the folks maybe they wouldn't have to start all over. And I think that is the concern that I would have. But check into that if you would, to see if I was correct on that.
Sure.
That you can use those same signatures from one cycle to the next, and then I think that's it. I think you get 2. at the state, and then that's it. But double check that for me, and that would be a question that I would have going forward on that. Other comments or questions on?
Chair?
Yes, Mr. Thomas.
Quickly going back, looking at the agenda of the minutes. So the first topic came up on January 22nd. You may remember we had several public speakers that came to that meeting talking about thresholds and the petition process. And so as a result of that, then that led to the first draft and then the meeting in which the supervisor of elections, Marcus, was here. That was on February 26th. And then we took another stab at the draft of that, and then we didn't present the last week because the last meeting because we wanted to have SOE, Marcus, have a chance to at least opine on the draft that is presented for you this evening. But it was originally in two different meetings, and the threshold was at that first meeting on January 22nd.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Other comments, questions? Commissioner Schwartz.
Yeah, just a question for council. The requirement that a petition sponsor must register as a political committee, where'd that come from? Is there a specific reason why that language is in there?
Sure. So it was discussed at the meeting on February 26th. Okay. I'll put it to you this way. Let me tell you what some of the consequences are of registering as a political committee. All right. Register as a political committee to when you're going through the process to do this, when you are collecting or expending funds, all right, to support this process and to engage in political advertising concerning this process or paying petition gatherers or anything like that, that all of that information, as you would with any other election process, would be disclosed in now quarterly, used to be monthly, campaign finance disclosures, okay? And so that is, again, I understand over here in Pinellas, it's been a matter of some question whether or not folks who do that have to register already under state law. I can tell you it's the order of the day in most other places in the state, because anytime two or more people are getting together spending over $500 to engage in any sort of political advertisement or electioneering communication organization or anything like this, they need to register with whoever you have to file with, either with the supervisor of elections or with the state or what have you, and then make quarterly campaign finance disclosures so the public can see who's paying in what money and what it's being spent on. So again, if the desire is not to have that clarifying language in this, it's perfectly fine. It's just, it was a suggestion that came up. Some of the revisions in here had their origin in revisions that were done to very similar language in Orange County back in 2016, and that was a provision that was added in that instance there, again, in the interest of clarifying the matter so that folks who were doing it, it was clear that they needed to disclose where their money was coming from and where it was going to.
Is that, does the state require that?
So the state in the Florida Election Code has a specific provision that expressly, right on the nose, says when you are running a constitutional amendment petition process, you must register as a political committee. Okay? I would suggest to you you could come up with a hypothetical maybe where you can dodge the filing requirements if you don't spend any money trying to collect tens of thousands of signatures. It'd be very difficult to do. But in most factual scenarios, organizers of a petition drive of the magnitude necessary to put something on the ballot in Pinellas County are going to cross a threshold where state law will have required them to file. They might just not, and nobody calls them on it. That's a different matter.
I've seen things like that happen in cities around
Of course.
here.
It happens.
Just say, oh, it's not worth arguing over, but yeah,
Yeah,
it does happen.
It happens all the time, and folks often suffer under the misimpression that elections at a county or municipal level are somehow not subject to Chapter 106, the campaign finance provisions, and that's just not the case.
Right. Commissioner Eggers.
Just back to this February 1st, May 1st thing. Do we know, like, if all of the petitions are due February 1st for state petitions. When must they finish being counted by the supervisor or verified by the supervisor? Do we know?
I did know that number when I was talking with the supervisor's office, and now it's not coming to me,
Okay.
Unfortunately.
So 60 days? I mean,
I don't. I don't want to give you any guess other than what the number actually would be.
I think that would have some bearing in my mind. If it's 30 days, and it doesn't hurt to get them February 1st anyway, and then they can start counting them after they deal with the states. And it can be lined up right away. I just want to make sure that we have plenty of time for the process. And
Understood. One thing I would offer in general, in talking with the folks at the supervisor's office, and I will share, this is a principle of amending charters more generally. Even when you have a state process that does things a certain way, endeavoring to take pages and pages of current state law and kind of mimic it step for step into your charter is going to eventually lead to trouble, because the legislature likes to amend the Florida election code as well as other parts of the Florida statutes, which means inevitably if you try to make it match every little bit, you'll end up with pages and pages in your charter. It won't be short. And then whenever they make a change, you're going to end up with two things that are almost the same but slightly different. And that'll be a lot more confusing than its own process.
I mean, originally I was thinking April, but she kind of was talking, as she was talking but not committing to any particular date, was making me think maybe we need to do it earlier. So that came from the conversation she had here without her saying anything. And the other thing that the chair brought up about was the issue that you brought up, Brian, on, the 2-year, allowing it to serve 2 years. It'd be interesting to see what the state allows. But I mean, there could be folks that no longer live here, right, that are part of that first approval process.
Well, I think it would be, you'd have to get all the petitions approved at the final time. So those petitions would,
you could hold on to them and then
yeah, exactly.
resubmit.
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
I got you. Thank you.
And I just want to
That
offer.
would be the intent anyway.
Yeah, I want to offer a thought, and that thought would be a different regime, if you will, than what's been set up in this amendment here, because what's set up here is you collect petitions, you turn them in. You collect petitions in a given month, and you turn them in for verification in a given month, all right? Which is the same process that is used with the state. That February 1st deadline is a final deadline. They have rolling deadlines throughout the entire process. The petitions cannot stay in their hot little hands too long. They have to be turned right in, and that number gets narrower as it gets closer to February 1st. So I would just offer, if there's a thought of it, in multiple cycles, then you want to think, would we stick with the regime laid out in this amendment, or would it be the old way where people just kind of bank it, and then if they're still a registered voter in Pinellas, 4 years hence, then it counts, and otherwise not, or what have you. So.
Okay. Other questions and comments? I know this is a complicated topic. Obviously, we'll have more time to talk about it. Anything else anyone wants Attorney Vose or Mr. Thomas to look at on this topic? I think we're winding down on direction, so any other direction to them would be good. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 6B, which is the compilation of draft charter amendments to date.
Thank you, Chairman. As I mentioned at your last meeting, I wanted to put everything you all have taken a look at from a formulated charter amendment standpoint all together in one spot, so you can see where you're at, see what has been put together for you, and, get potentially some direction or discussion or thoughts as to what we're looking at with all of these, because we are getting to the point, Mr. Thomas and I, when we are going to be eminently here putting together a draft of your final report, which is going to have everything you've looked at, you've done, and most importantly, the charter amendments you would put on the ballot. So these are the amendments that you have had prepared and discussed and entertained to date. They're attached as Exhibits A through F. I didn't separately attach the initiative petition one because you saw that for the first time at this meeting. You have that in this agenda packet. So those 6 that you have in front of you, and this is, as I mentioned in the memo, not in a recommended order of how you might put it on the ballot. That's its own discussion as you get towards the very end. When you zero in on the charter amendments you would put on the ballot, one of the very last discussions you have is, okay, how are we going to order this on the ballot? And I have some kind of general principles for discussion on that, but it's ultimately up to the CRC. So the first is your charter cleanup amendment that you'd previously taken a look at. It's long, but just does some ultimately it does charter cleanup that doesn't have any legal effect to the entire charter. The second is your amendment styled here, conforming the publication requirements for county charter amendment referenda to the Florida Election Code. Basically gets rid of the different advertising requirements that the charter has that are similar and almost the same, but not exactly the same as those in state law, resulting in even more ads getting put in the newspaper that are at a cycle that I don't think anyone thought were particularly effective. So as that clarification there. Exhibit 3 is providing that all county charter amendments be held only at general elections. The fourth, Exhibit D, was the charter amendment put together lowering the signature percentage for petition drives to propose charter amendments, as you all have previously discussed at this meeting, from 8 to 5%. E was the charter amendment revising the thresholds for appointment and removal of the county attorney. If you'll recall, we've gone through various revisions of that, and this is the most recent version that I had brought back to the CRC. Finally, Exhibit F was the term limits amendment that you all took a look at and had the numbers that majority of the CRC had gravitated towards at your last meeting. So these are the amendments you've looked at thus far, and as we approach our final set of meetings, we would welcome any direction, if not final decisions, but direction as to what to firm up in a draft final report as we move forward.
Okay. Questions, comments? Commissioner Eggers?
Yeah, just would be, we don't have to get into it tonight, but obviously Mike Twitty is the person representing the constitutionals. And so when we get to Exhibit E, 9-vote supermajority or 8-vote supermajority, I just want to make sure that, get his thoughts on that as it relates to, 7 county commissioners, not completely, taking over the day, but and 9 gives you at least 2 votes to, anyway, just a thought, and other than that, it's pretty good.
Thank you, Commissioner. And we can definitely finalize that when we do our final vote or our final discussion. I think that's something we've all gone back and forth on.
I do too.
Yeah, and that's good, because I think what Mr. Vose and Mr. Thomas need to know is what other areas, if any, are there like that. So is there any other, we just talked about the initiative and the 5%, 8%. So, but anything else in terms of anybody having concerns, revisions, questions about the 6 or 7 that we're currently talking about that we haven't already talked about? Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Vose, could you refresh my memory on this is going to be Exhibit A, the county charter cleanup amendment as to, we had some back and forth about this in an earlier meeting as to why section 5.02 special laws, which is what you've got here in the supporting documentation, subsection B, you struck Pinellas County Industry Council. And as I recall, you had to dig into all of these different things, which were primarily special districts created by the legislature. And could you refresh my memory as to why we couldn't just remove that subsection? And I remember you saying that you'd be wary of perception of deleting them, appearing to the voters like it might give the county the authority to meddle in those things?
Yeah, that was my general advice, is the blanket deletion of the entire section. So, two things, actually. One, the blanket deletion as to most of them, not necessarily, some get a little squirrely by their own terms. And we haven't discussed it much. It's kind of an in-the-weeds thing. Our office has had an opportunity to dig further through all these different ones, and most of them are in such a way that the charter could not do anything to them in any event, whether this was deleted or not. And so it may lead to confusion to delete this, to lead people to think, now they can do X and now they can do Y, what have you. There are some of them that have some level of power or authority given to the Board of County Commissioners by the terms of the special acts. So they're not exactly in the same category as the county is 100% hands-off, okay? So it's a little messy. Mm-hmm. So that's why I recommended against a blanket deletion, because a lot of them, it would not have the effect of changing anything, but folks might think it does. With the rest, it's a little messier, and it would be a substantive change, or could be a substantive change with this protection here, but then, another provision in the special act and so on. And when you start making any sort of change in something that we would style as a cleanup amendment that does have a legal effect, we're going to need to separately describe that. And I don't think that had been the intention with regard to anything in cleanup. What you do have, the deletion of the Pinellas County Industry Council, is a very simple one, because that entity has been abolished by the legislature. It does not exist. So it's listed there as being deleted because it does not exist. So it's purely cleanup.
Thank you, Mr. Bose. That makes sense. How much of this, and I know that I think we spoke up about this in another meeting, but you show the ballot proposal and then the text revisions. So does section A of Exhibit A go on the ballot and then everything else doesn't?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So
it would just be that language there under A that would go on the ballot. The pages and pages and stuff doesn't go on the ballot.
okay. If you have the list of what your team has looked into where there is that differentiation between there being some reference where there's approval by the county commission, I would still like to see everything that the county doesn't directly have jurisdiction over removed. I don't know what the will of the rest of the board is, but I don't know if I don't think the state constitution references acts of the federal government, for example. So in a perfect world, maybe I'm being nitpicky here because I have brought it up a couple times, I would just love to see things that are not relevant in the charter removed from the charter while we're in there. And particularly if we're not, it would be nice if we could have all of these things like in their entirety, the edits displayed on maybe the CRC webpage, for example, so that people can dig in there and see. But I think there's a way to communicate that this isn't the county usurping authority over these boards that the state created, or these districts that the state created. So I understand the one entity is stricken because it no longer exists. So if we could get this just so, then maybe future CRCs wouldn't have to review this anyway, or include it in a cleanup. those are my thoughts. My request would be to understand which ones have to be in there, if we could, if that's not too time consuming to go back.
So we have the materials put together, at least in the
Okay.
review form. Not put together in tables or anything like that, but that can be put together. Again, I would only offer this caution with regard to this one here. I think I mentioned before, very early on in your process, that the impression I had always gotten with respect to this list was that this list was put in, remember, your charter was initially created by the Florida legislature. All right, it's one of the few in the state that started out as a special act. And it was at a much earlier time in everyone's understanding of home rule and how it would play out, such that I think they felt it was very important to have those listed there because it wasn't crystal clear as to whether or not some Florida Supreme Court may say, yes, they do have those powers, because it's not written down in express complete sentences that says they can't. It's a whole confluence of Florida Supreme Court case law that says they can or they can't or what have you. And the Florida Supreme Court has ebbed and flowed on this very point, relating specifically to Pinellas County, as you all know about term limits. It had previously been the holding of the Florida Supreme Court that it is unconstitutional to have term limits. And then the Florida Supreme Court changed their mind, and this went to a fundamental power of charter counties. So just offering the thought there that if there were a shift in the future of what the understanding of the proper bounds of charter government versus legislative acts were to shift in the case law, it would end up being a substantive change if that list isn't there and they say, they took that list out, and now we've got this case that says X. This is like a caution for something that might happen in the 2030s. I recognize this is, out in the future, but I just want to share this point. I only want to make sure that the CRC and the voters understand what legal effect they're implementing by voting yes or no on a given charter amendment. So, but we'd be glad to go back and put it together so you can see a little bit more of what we're looking at with regard to those different acts.
Thank you, Mr. Vose. Maybe one more. These are independent districts. Is that right? Not dependent?
A lot of them are. Some of them would not technically be, off the top of my head, I'd need to go back and look. There are a number of elements to make something a special district versus some other public body, okay? One being a geographical area, and it's usually not enough that it's just in this county. It might designate a specific area and so on. So almost all of them looking at it, yes, they're definitely independent special districts under the Special District Act.
So do we then, I feel like Chair Ongst has given me a blessing to keep going with you here. Do we know if this is the comprehensive list of every independent special district? So
I don't believe it is.
you don't believe it is?
No.
Okay.
And some of these names are outdated too.
If we did, back in 2016, we did some updating of some of the names. If there is updating of any of these names that didn't get put together, I would welcome that input either in the meeting or after the meeting, and we can incorporate that certainly in cleanup amendment very easily.
Yeah, Pinellas Planning Council's for Pinellas now. I'm sure there are others. And, this is only a fraction of the special districts in Pinellas County. We have, how many fire districts, Chief Milligan? 4? And there's only one of them in here?
So, Mr. Chair, that's kind of the point that I'm getting at, and thank you so much for the historic context, because I didn't know most of those things that you brought up in one of the first meetings, but it seems strange to me to give protections to some special districts just because of a point in time, and not all of them. And as opposed to continuing to revise names, my preference would again just be that we remove what we don't have jurisdiction over, and I would, you know, obviously, as we have, entrust you to try to craft some language, if we could, that just says, you know, one more portion of this ballot proposal, Exhibit A, that just says, you know, one of the things that's going away is the removal of entities over which the county has no jurisdiction.
Another way you could do it is you could add language to the first sentence. This document shall in no manner change the status, duties, or responsibilities of any special districts authorized by the effective law, including but not limited to the following, and then update the names and cut out the ones that don't exist anymore. Or you could just cut the whole thing out. Or you could just do what you're doing now. I mean, it's up to y'all what you want to do with it. Essentially, as Commissioner Overend says, this is a tautology, right? I mean, it means nothing, because we couldn't affect these districts in the charter if we wanted to. And whether they're named in here or not is meaningless. And that's the state of the law. But what we're dealing with is, as Attorney Vose said, is something from 1980 that people at that time thought was important to put in there. So.
And the other question is, to the point that you brought up, is we're differentiating this group from other groups that should otherwise be included here as well, and have the same kind of protection that you're talking about in that first sentence.
Super protection.
Yeah. super duper protection. I mean, the fire districts for one. So
Yeah, I would agree with your chair as well, and that also pretty much it would be independent special districts, and because the dependent districts are created by the county, so independent districts are created by statute. So I think that's where, if you're going to relook at changing it, would be an independent special district. And it doesn't matter if it's fire control, children's districts, water control, water districts. When they're independently created, statute actually creates that district and dictates how the district's designed, what it does, what powers it has. And the county has no say in that whatsoever. It's all done by statute and state. With a dependent district, the county creates that.
So can we give some more specific direction to Attorney Vose and Attorney Berryman, because this is the type of thing where it could take them a lot of time. So do we think we want to just axe the whole thing? Do we think we want to make it a inclusive but not exclusive, like including these but not exclusive of these, any and all? Or do we think we want to try to go to the effort of naming every single one of them and adding stuff? What are your thoughts? And Attorney Vose, if you have better advice, let us know.
Thought just occurred to me, and so this is just off the top of my head, so please don't hold it against me. Here's the thought I'm playing with. Your point is a good one. I would suggest you wouldn't want to draw the line between merely independent and dependent special districts, because technically local governments can create independent special districts as well. But your point is a good one, zeroing in on entities created by the legislature. I'm wondering if we can go back through the list here and see if we can come up with a descriptive category to effectively say that the charter can't affect the status, duties, or responsibilities of any board, authority, district, or council, or other public entity created by legislative act unless authorized by law, unless authorized by its general or special law.
And then just cut out all the names.
Yeah.
That would probably be a lot clearer, right?
I think so, because you could always have another independent district created by statute, and then they wouldn't be in the list either. So if you just generalize that, I think would be much better.
And I'd want to zero it in on entities created by the legislature, All right, because again, you can have all sorts of other ways you create entities. The county can create entities. County and the city can get together and create an entity. Happens all the time. And those are instances where you may want to have the charter someday be able to get in and fool around with it. But with regard to entities created by legislative act, that they can't exercise any authority unless authority is granted by general or special law, which means the legislature can, and we catch those instances I mentioned. We came across a couple where some power is given to the county in the act to do this or that or what have you. I think we can put together something along those lines, and we have at the very least the research done on this list of them here to zero in on, would such a broad statement as that break anything in this list of, 17, whatever it is here. So let me go test that language, if that's all right, against the research that we've done to see if that encapsulates that. And that, as opposed to just, that would be kind of a substitute, Commissioner, to straight deletion. It'd be kind of a swap out to that rule, so that it would be deletion of the list of the particulars, but it would kind of swap out this this long list for a general statement along the lines of what I said.
I think that would be excellent.
Okay.
I especially love, obviously, the distinction that if otherwise provided by law, the county does have jurisdiction, because it's entirely possible the legislature might, in the future, do something with a special district or something that says, by the way, the county can,
Do X or do Y.
approve or disapprove the millage rate. I don't know what they're going to say, but they could do any number of things like that. And so things that we wouldn't anticipate, having something that covers all scenarios is much better than what we have now.
Right.
So.
Well, it would be nice if you could then pass along to Barry and company to create the real list of those that are special districts, so that we could let our residents know who might be asking the question, like, who created this one? Is this a state? Yeah, we have a list of them. They're not in here anymore.
Yep.
But here's the list.
So
It'd be nice to have that for those folks, and maybe to remind a couple of commissioners.
we don't,
county commissioners.
we don't necessarily, we haven't done research on the canonical list of all of them that are not in this list, because yes, there are ones that exist that are not in this list. We've researched just the ones that are here. That list exists, if nothing else, in the index of special laws that the legislature puts out every year. I anticipate it's a long one for Pinellas County.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have somewhere.
Yeah, I can get you the list
Okay, good.
of all the taxing authorities that would fall in that, but I wouldn't necessarily know which ones were created by the legislature.
Sure. And I would offer that even though those are all taxing authorities, that may not be the complete list of all entities, because some of them don't have taxing powers. Yeah. So, but it would be very helpful in any event. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes.
You could actually get that list from DEO, Department of Economic Opportunity. They manage all special districts in the state of Florida, so they would have a growing list of what's in every county, and do have it separated on their website.
And again, to get very detailed in the weeds, you're 100% correct, but I'm not 100% convinced that every single entity on this list, I'll have to go back and double check, is a special district. Yeah, some of them are not, they're just a board. They're not, a special district that has to register with Department of Commerce and so on.
Planning Council is the Metropolitan Planning Authority, which is now, or organization, which is now for Pinellas. So that's not a taxing district.
Certainly not a taxing district, no. So again, you get all these different overlapping categories, if you will, but I think if we draw it broad enough to the question of any governmental entity created by, by the legislature, and then carve out that exemption, I think we can put something together along those lines. One thing I would offer is I'm going to be, to implement this idea, I'm going to be playing around as to whether or not I would recommend incorporating this in a cleanup amendment. Still very possible. Probably just need to get a little bit more descriptive, or whether it need to be broken out into a separate one. I'm inclined to say I could probably still put it in a cleanup amendment with a straight face, But just wanted to let you know that's part of the evaluation we're going to be looking at.
Perfect. Other direction, comments on the draft language so far, or the draft initiative so far? All right, moving on. Other updates from Mr. Thomas and/or Mr. Vose.
Just to bring everyone's attention, we are scheduled for our next meeting on Thursday, May 2nd. As I said, we'll try to have whatever speakers we have prepared for the discussion on a county executive or commission manager, form of government discussions at that point. At that stage, I think General Counsel Vose and I would really like to get things nailed down so that we can finalize a draft, recognizing that we're scheduling that first proposed hearing on May 23rd. So we can sit tight and figure out if we need the meeting on the 13th after we come up with our next discussion, or if we're just going to circulate a draft in advance of that first meeting. So, but appreciate everybody just keeping those dates on your calendar as identified for the time being in case we need to add any meetings before we finish the process here.
Okay, very good. Anybody else other than Commissioner Schwartz who can't make it on May 2nd? In this room, obviously there's some others that aren't here. But yeah, Mr. Thomas, you may want to include in an email to the board that if they have comments that they would like to be considered at that May 2nd hearing or meeting, that they submit them to you ahead of time in writing, so that we can have the benefit of their thoughts. Because I think at this May 2nd hearing, we're basically going to be saying yay or nay to moving forward with looking at ballot language on the executive mayor question. And then basically everything else should be pretty close to, we're going to make a final decision at those public hearings, number 1 and number 2. So any other direction or comments or concerns that our board members who are not here tonight particularly want to weigh in, if they're not going to be at May 2nd, they need to let you guys know in writing probably before then. And so that way we can hear it and you can share it with us.
Absolutely. The agenda packet will be going out this week for that next meeting, so I'll make sure I flag that in the material that's going out to the CRC members.
All right.
And I would offer as well, I may be repeating myself from what I'd mentioned before, but coming into and going out of the next meeting discussion with regard to elected county executive, if it's the will of the CRC to move forward with language and so on, I would recommend folks who are interested in that topic come with some direction to share around, to give us some direction to put together some language so we can try to hit the bullseye the first time around, bringing something back to you.
Very good. Anything else for the good of the order? If not, we will stand adjourned. Anything else? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.